Apologize.
Can we talk about Obama?
Yeah, go for it.
Well, a once-in-a-lifetime political talent. I mean, truly a genius at what he did. A carpetbagger who shows up in Chicago and makes himself into something that he wasn't before he arrived. When I read, was it In Dreams from My Father or The Audacity of Hope, I can't remember which one, about Obama in Altgeld Gardens, the housing project on the far south side of Chicago where he was an organizer. And I thought, what does this dude know about that? What does he really know about that? When the Jeremiah Wright controversy emerged during the 2008 campaign, this was the radical preacher at the church,
with the video clips
Trinity
of the
United Church of Christ
America,
Obama and Michelle Obama attended from the very first day of their marriage and brought their children in. I think Jeremiah Wright might have baptized their kids. I know Jeremiah Wright. I've been in the same room around a conference table with him. I know the Trinity United Church of Christ. My cousin Tabiti was buried there. His funeral was there. My wife and kids and I flew in from Boston to attend his funeral at Jeremiah Wright's church that is located 2 miles from the high school that I graduated from, Harlan High School in Chicago. I know that community. I happen to know that many of the families who send their youngsters to the church school that Jeremiah Wright oversaw have members who are followers of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and the much hated Louis Farrakhan. I know that. Those families are a part of the texture of the South Side of Chicago. So when I heard the carpetbagger, Barack Obama, try during the 2008 campaign to separate himself from the noxious toxic political effect of his association with Jeremiah Wright, I drew a line. I said, you do not represent me. You are not speaking for me. And I stand by that.
Am I supposed to argue against that?
Sorry?
No, I said, am I supposed to argue against that?
No, I mean, I'm just saying.
No, I understand. Yeah.
I'm saying I wrote this book, the Late Admissions memoir book. And a character in the book is my Uncle Mooney, who was the head of the household where I grew up. It was an extended family thing. My mother and my sister and I lived in a small apartment upstairs and in the back of a grand house that my Uncle Mooney paid for through the sweat of his brow every day because he's a shopkeeper and a hustler and a barber and a guy that scraped to get by. And I benefited from that. And he would not for a minute have bought this Audacity of Hope. We are the ones we've been waiting for, hope in whatever idea. He would have seen through Obama from day one. He would have not thought him a tribune of black people. He would have said the first black president, and then he would have rolled his eyes. So that's where I'm coming from.
What do you think is, I guess, the moral failing? Was it because my understanding was at the time, the statements that were coming out of that church, because I remember the videos and the 9/11 comments and everything, basically, the chicken has come home to roost. I imagine you've seen all these. I think this is Jeremiah Wright, right? Talking about, people say, God bless America. I say, God damn America. But yeah, that these were very spicy comments that were getting thrown at him in the election. Do you think he should have would it have been better for him to say, sometimes he says some crazy stuff, but this is my community. I stand by him. What do you think would have been the more morally, I guess, respectable decision to make?
I mean, if I said what you just said, which is my inclination, this is my guy, warts and all. You have to understand it's complicated. I mean, you can't expect that the culture of the South Side of Chicago after 100 years of post-emancipation suppression of African Americans, of discrimination, redlining, racism, Mayor Richard J. Daley, the cops, that it's going to be pretty. The Elijah Muhammad, Louis Farrakhan shtick doesn't come from nowhere. It emerges out of American history. You needed to have been there in 1920 and 1950 in Chicago to understand why this stuff would be popular. I mean, nobody. I mean, he couldn't. He could have said it. That would have been honest, but it would have been a political fiasco for him. He would have gotten buried by, and John McCain would have become president in 2008. And I'm not necessarily saying that would have been a good thing. So he was pragmatic. He did what he needed to do, and that was part of his political talent, the willingness to do what one needs to do. So I'm responding by saying, I think while I am less than enamored of the performance that he rendered in that campaign, because I thought it was inauthentic in the extreme, I am pragmatic enough to recognize that that or something like that was going to be necessary for anybody who was going to actually win. And of course, it's not just goddamn America, it's Jeremiah Wright's view on the Middle East that is a problem for Barack Obama in 2008. He sympathizes with the Palestinians, etc. His view about Zionism is what it is. That is Jeremiah Wright, the friend of Louis Farrakhan, who ministers to a black community on the south side of Chicago, has these particular views that he has. And that was, I think, the subtext of Obama's divorce from the ministry that nurtured him, that gave him the title of his book, The Audacity of Hope. That was taken from a sermon by Jeremiah Wright that baptized his children, that gave him a seat in the Senate of the state legislature of the state of Illinois, from which he launched an ultimately successful presidential campaign. He had to both own it and disown it. He had to both be black, but not that black.
And so in your mind, you're not, like what I'm hearing is not saying he should have done it differently. It's just essentially, but because he had to kind of like, to some degree, distance himself from his own community and like the grittiness and like the unprettiness that exists within it, like both the good and the bad, you don't feel like he was a good representation of the black community.
Precisely, Kyla. That's it. I mean, and in a way, it's a lament. And I think the lament actually underscores something about racial representation in America. It's America, after all. And you have to get 50+1% to do anything in America. And you got to appeal mainly to people who do not belong to your group. On the other hand, it's America, after all. And black is, that's cool, Mm-hmm. We want a black president. That narrative is kind of irresistible. So you want to get elected president and you're black, you wrap yourself in that thing, but you don't wrap yourself too tightly, because if you did, it would be noxious and offensive to people. And so you end up doing this dog and pony show, which ultimately was historically successful in a monumental way. And those of us who are core believers in our group's narrative feel badly treated by it, or at least I do.
Do you feel similar to Kamala then? Like with her identity with like the black community and stuff? I feel like she's wrapped less tightly in it than Barack, but I could be wrong. Do you feel like there's kind of like this LARPy distancing that's also occurring?
Kamala. We're a long way from 2008. We're 16 years from 2008. Black. Okay, if you insist. I mean, as I tell my students at Brown when we talk about this kind of thing, she has chosen to be black. We should let her choose to be black. And then I asked them, should we have allowed Rachel Dolezal to choose to be black? Rachel Dolezal, if anyone needs to know, was the white woman who thought of herself as being black and who fancied and fashioned her biography and her resume and her hairstyle and I don't know, her skin tone or whatever to try to quote unquote pass for black. So, I mean, I don't want to be too partisan here.
You can be as partisan as you want.
You can be as partisan as you want. He's hoping for it, all right?
No, I'm okay. I don't argue too much on this show, okay?
Kamala Harris' father, Donald Harris, I know he's an economist. He's older than me, but not that much older than me. When I was on the job market in 1976, that's almost a half century ago, and I flew out to Palo Alto to be interviewed by people at Stanford, he was on the hiring committee. I remember sitting in his office and talking with him. He's a Marxist. a post-Keynesian. I mean, I could go into the details. I mean, but basically, he's a radical socialist-oriented quantitative economist, quite skilled at what he did. He's Jamaican, a light-skinned brother. I'm sure he has a lot of European ancestry and maybe some Chinese, because it's Jamaica after all, and whatever. And the mother is a Brahmin, Indian woman. I know a good friend of mine is an economist named Rajiv Sethi, and Rajiv's mother and Kamala's mother were classmates in college in India. So I have some ideas. So she's black. She decides she's going to be black. Okay.
What does it mean for you when, I guess in terms of an identity of somebody, like when somebody is black or isn't black, I guess in this context?
Well, at a theoretical level, it shouldn't mean all that much, because we're in the 21st century and race is a kind of a fiction. It's kind of an ephemera, and
What do you mean when you say that?
Well, what I mean is it's not essential. That is, her being black doesn't represent me because I'm black and she's black. I mean, if I think like that, I'm a child. I'm a dupe. I'm being led by the nose. I'm being driven by stuff that's not essential. And I get this in part from my wife, who is black, from a working class Houston neighborhood, and who is a socialist in her basic political instincts, and who thinks of, whenever you say race, she says, oh, that's culture war stuff. Why don't we talk about the economy? Why don't we talk about the working class? Why don't we talk about the wealth distribution? Why don't we talk about taxes? Whatever. So that's what I mean by saying I shouldn't be much affected by whether or not she's black. I also don't trust the politicians when they wave the flag of race. I think they're trying to appeal to my baser instincts. They're trying to get me. I mean, it's like voting for somebody because they're a Catholic. Or they're a Jew. The first Jew to be this or that. I mean, people will do it, but it feels a little abdicating of my responsibility as a citizen to assess people on the basis of the deeper content of what it is that they represent as political leaders.